Hey guys, it's Dana from MadeEveryday.com. One of the most common video requests I get from you guys is how to sew a little girl's dress. So let's do it. As much as I love sewing skirts, sewing dresses is just as fun. I mean, how cute is that? And it's not really any more difficult to sew a dress. It just requires a few additional techniques and oftentimes a pattern to go along with it. But we will walk through all of that together. Here's what you need. Fabric for the outside of your dress, fabric for the lining, a bit of elastic cord, one button, and a pattern. The pattern that I'm using for this dress is called the First Day Dress, and you can find it on my website. Go to MadeEveryday.com. It comes in sizes 2 to 10. You print it from your home printer, piece everything together, tape it, and I already cut out the size 5 for my daughter. Now the thing that I like about this is that you only need one pattern piece for the dress, and especially since we're doing sleeveless, that's all we need. It's the same for the front and the back. And the other great thing is that it has a lining that goes in the dress, which I know might sound kind of scary or difficult at first, but it is much easier than you think, and it gives your dress a really nice polished look. So let's cut this out. As you can see on the pattern piece here, it says fold. That means you're gonna cut this on a fold so that when you're done, you have a symmetrical piece. So here's my outer fabric here, and I am using fabric from my collection called Blush, which I just love these giant flowers. They're super fun. Okay, so I'm going to cut a large piece of fabric first, and then I'm going to fold it. And refer to your pattern. It will tell you all the details of exactly how much fabric you need for each size. And you would want to pre-wash and dry all your fabrics first so that everything is ready to go. Okay, now we're going to fold this over like that, and fold this side in as well. And this is the cool thing, because we're gonna cut 2 pieces, so you kind of fold the pieces until they join in the middle. Okay, then we can lay our piece on here. And because this print is so large and specific, you wanna kind of pay attention to that. Where do I want the flowers to end? I'm making sure that I'm between 2 flowers, so the middle of my dress, everything looks symmetrical and nice. Okay, then you put this on there, and we're gonna cut out our pieces. I'm just holding my hand on top of my pattern piece. You can use pattern weights or you can use a rotary cutter. I'm using scissors. Just do what works for you. Okay, I'm gonna cut this out, then I'm gonna flip it over, cut out my other piece, and then we'll go to our lining pieces. Okay, I have 2 outer pieces to my dress and 2 lining pieces. You can see them, they have right sides together right now. Now we're gonna do 2 more quick things before we start sewing. One is to trim the bottom hem of the lining layer. And that's just because the outer layer is going to kind of fold around the lining when we're done. So I'm gonna trim it 1 inch. And if you're not really sure how short you want your dress to be yet, you can wait and do this later, but I just find that it's a little easier to do it right now. And this might be easier to do with a rotary cutter, but I'm gonna quickly do this with my scissors. And if you remember my cutting trick, fold that over and use that as your guide. Okay, lining pieces are ready. The last thing we want to do is to mark where we're going to cut a slit in the back of our dress. That's where the little elastic and a little button closure is gonna go. So for this size dress, for a size 5, I'm gonna measure down 4 to 5 inches. Just kind of depends on if your child has a larger head, maybe go with 5 inches. And I'm finding the middle point. I can see where my fold was here. And I'm gonna mark with a fabric marker. I'm on the wrong side of the fabric. I'm marking down 4 inches. Okay, just like that. Now, we're gonna go to our sewing machine and we're gonna sew the shoulder seams separately, lining pieces, outer pieces, using 3/8 inch seam allowance. I've sewn all of my shoulder seams, and now I just wanna open this up and press those seams flat. We'll do this for the lining and for the outer fabric. Pressing is so important when you are sewing garments. Well, I mean, it's important with all kinds of sewing, but it will really give your things that you make a polished professional look. So take the time to stop and press out those seams. Okay, now we are going to do a step that will prepare us for later on in the project. We are going to press these armholes under 3/8 of an inch. And trust me, this will be so helpful later. Okay, fold that over. And it can be a little awkward to fold on the curve like this, so just do your best. I kind of use my left hand to sort of help guide the fabric as I go. There we go. Okay, and then do it for the other side also. Okay, now what we want to do is clip into this little seam allowance is kind of what we just created. So I'm taking my scissors, and you don't want to clip very far, maybe half of the distance up to the crease. This will allow this curved area to lay a little more flat under the arm so it's not bunching up. And this is typical of when you sew with curves on garments or other things. Kind of just allows the fabric to relax a little bit. Okay, now I'm gonna go and do it to this side, and then I'm gonna do my lining piece as well. Okay, I'm done clipping, and I'm done with my iron. Let's set that aside. And lay everything out again. We still have right sides together here. And we are going to now sew the side seams. We're gonna sew, it's kind of like we're sewing two separate dresses, and then we're gonna combine them at the neck hole. Okay, so open those creases back up. Like I said, we were just prepping it for a later stage. And pin these together at the side seams. Same thing over here. Try to be really precise here. When you're working with a lining that's going inside of a dress, they really need to match up perfectly. So it's important to pay attention to all those little things. Okay, set that aside. And let's do the same here. And especially when you're working with this directional print, you want to make sure my flowers are lining up, which kind of depends more on how well I was at cutting it out. But you know, these two little leaves, let's try to match those up right there so that it looks really cool when it's done. Okay, I'm gonna pin this, I'm gonna pin the other side, and then we're going to sew down the side seams of both the outer and the lining using 3/8 inch seam allowance. I just finished sewing all the side seams, and now I'm just pressing those seams out for the outer and for the lining. Now we're gonna combine the two pieces together. So set your iron aside. And let's turn the lining right side out. Okay, we're gonna put this right inside of the outer one. And they should match up perfectly if we did our cutting and sewing and all of that stuff correctly. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna line it up first at the shoulder seams and pin that together. And I'll line up the other shoulder seam. Pin those together. And then, there we go. Oh, that looks really great. Okay, put a few more pins around the neckline. Okay, the neckline is pinned. Now comes a moment that the first time you do it seems a little scary, but trust, it's gonna work okay. Make sure the lining is nice and smooth inside. And let's shake this down a little more. Okay, there we go, that feels better. Okay, that line that we marked at the beginning, we're gonna actually cut right into that. I know, it sounds kind of scary to cut into your fabric. So here we go. Okay, just like that. Then place some pins in there. What we've done is to kind of create an extension of our neckline. So instead of the neckline just being right here, the neckline is now all the way down and around. So makes it so you can pull the dress on and off. Some dresses have a zipper in the back. It just is, there are many different ways to create a closure on a dress. And this is probably one of the more simple ways. And before we sew this in place, we need to add a little bit of elastic cord in there. So what we're going to create is, we're gonna have a button on one side and the elastic cord on the other side. So to determine exactly how much cord you need, it kind of depends on your button, where the buttonholes are. But what I like to do is remember that you're going to have a 3/8 to about a 1/4 inch seam allowance over on this slit area. I kind of just hold it there with my button here so I can gauge how far it's going to need to attach. Okay, that looks pretty good. Then I'm going to stick this the other way inside. Okay, so I'm sticking that inside right there. And then it's kind of hard to put a pin on that cord, so I'm gonna pin really close around it. And I'm going to remember as I'm sewing to come back and kind of like fine tune how that's being sewn in. Because right now it's sort of just kind of sitting there. And I wanna make sure that the both ends are really close together. So, okay. I think we're ready to go to our sewing machine. Now I'm actually going to turn this inside out, although I think the whole thing is inside out right now. So I just want to turn it so that the pins are on the inside there. It makes it a little bit easier to sew around the neckline. Okay, come over to your machine. And you can start anywhere along the neckline. I am starting, I guess, at the top of one of the slits. And we're going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance, as we've been doing throughout the dress. Okay, start sewing. Okay, go around. I'm removing my pins as I go. And you know, kind of go slowly here. It's important that you're precise on this curve. So if you need to adjust, you can make your speed a little slower here. I love my baby lock for that reason. It's just nice because sometimes my foot goes a little too fast. Okay, now I'm approaching the part where that elastic cord is. So I'm gonna sew over to the slit. And then we're just gonna kind of double check everything, make sure that it is in the right spot. Okay, I'm gonna lift my needle up. Okay, I wanna make sure that these two tails right here are just kind of butted up next to each other. That looks good. Okay, I'm gonna sew one more. Okay, pivot and turn. And we're gonna sew that cording right into our seam allowance. Let's remove this. Actually, I'm gonna leave that pin there. It's gonna kind of help keep it in place. Okay, and then I'm gonna do a back stitch. I'm gonna sew back and forth a few times just to make sure it's really secure in that spot. Sew back down again. Now, if you find when you're done, we'll always do a quality inspection, but if you find that it got kind of messed up, no big deal. You can go back and pick that part out with your seam ripper and do it again. Okay, now we're sewing down the slit, and I am going to kind of taper my seam allowance from a 3/8 inch down to a 1/4 inch, or maybe even less when I get to the bottom of the slit. This way it helps your fabric just not get all bunched up at the bottom. So as I'm going, I'm kind of getting closer to the edge of the fabric there. Not too far that I go off the fabric. Okay, make sure everything's smooth here. Okay, now as I get to the bottom of this slit here, I'm going to stop, do a little pivot turn, and then I'm just going to sew about 1 or 2 stitches along the bottom. Like that. Pivot turn and go back up the other side. And the smaller seam allowance here is gonna make this area lay a lot nicer. So you can see how I'm really close to the edge there. Okay, then as I go back up to the top, I'm going to increase back up to kind of a 3/8 inch. Okay, I'm back to the top, do a back stitch, cut my threads. I love this cutting feature on my baby lock. Okay, now before we do anything, let's do just a little quality inspection on that elastic that we sewed and see how it looks. That looks pretty good. I do wish that I had sewn these ends a little closer together, but it just depends on how comfortable you are with your project. I'm gonna leave it like that. I feel like it's okay. Okay, so let's come back. Let's trim off the ends of this cord. We don't need that anymore. And then you could clip around the collar, and sometimes that's fine. What I prefer to do is to just trim it down all the way around, because when you're using a really light fabric and you do those little clips, you can sometimes see these little cuts throughout the dress. So I am just trimming it down to about 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, maybe 1/4 of an inch. 1/8 of an inch would be pretty close. And then the cutting will help as we go down into this little slit also. When we turn it right side out, if you find that this slit isn't working very well, you could put a few little clips into there and that might help it lay a little better. Okay, let's cut this last part. All right, let's turn it right side out and see how it looks so far. Pull that out and then stuff it right back inside. Okay. Shake it all out. That always helps, a good shake. And then we can see how it looks. Let's check out the back area of the slit. You want to kind of press these corners out with your fingers, like that. And our slit looks pretty good. It's actually laying really nicely. So what we'd want to do is go to our iron, press this all around, and then come back to our machine and sew a top stitch, which is just kind of a finishing stitch all the way around. Okay, I'm going to increase my stitch length just a little bit on my top stitching to a 3 or a 3.5. Just because I like a slightly longer stitch on my top stitching. And I'm using a 1/8 inch seam allowance as I go around. Okay, I'm done doing my top stitching around the neckline, which looks really nice and polished. And now comes the kind of slightly tricky part. We're gonna do the armholes here. And there are many different ways to attach a lining into a dress. And the reason we can't just sew the armholes with right sides together is that you could never then turn it right side out because of the neckline. So this is why we pressed it earlier. This will make this step easier. So we're gonna turn these little creases under into each other like that. And this is going to create our little seam all the way around. So I'm gonna place a pin in there. There we go. And I find that it is good to start at the 2 seams first. And then as you go around, you can make adjustments and, shimmy things around as needed. Okay, so place a pin right there. And then we're just gonna work our way around the armhole. Now you wanna make sure that everything is nice and smooth as you're going, so it might help to place a pin. It's just kind of a placeholder that's keeping these 2 layers together. There you go. Okay, now I'm just gonna keep working my way around. And this can take a little bit of time, but you know what? Just be slow and be kind of meticulous here because this is a really important part. You want this to look nice and not have any folds or, look funny or anything like that. Okay, now let's pin the other armhole. Okay, I am done pinning everything around and let's hold it up and just say, oh, this looks awesome. Everything's laying nice and flat and you can see the armholes look really great. Okay, let's go to our machine and sew both of those in place. Okay, I'm sewing about 1/8 of an inch from the edge here. And I'm just going slowly all the way around. It can feel a little awkward because you have all these pins in here and Just work carefully. So what we're doing when we sew this in place is we're kind of sewing a top stitch as our seam. So I guess that saves on one step. We don't have to do a top stitch around here. Okay, this armhole is done. Let's go to the other armhole. Okay, I'm done with the armholes, and you guys, we are near the finish line here. Now, because this is an A-line dress, one thing we want to do before we press this is to angle the outer hem a little bit. As you can see, if I was to pull this up, we end up with a little bit of excess fabric here on the sides. So, unroll that, and lay this flat. We are going to sew about 1 inch up at an angle, kind of a similar angle here. Do it the opposite way on both sides. So let's go back to our machine. Okay, forward and back stitch, and then just sew at an angle going down like that. I'm not being super precise, but it will work as you're folding the hem up. Okay, let's go press our hem in place. You want to make sure that everything is really flat before we put that hem in place, because this lining is going to be enclosed inside. So if it's jumbled at all, it's not going to let your dress lay flat. So smooth it out, and I think it's helpful to place a few pins around, just like we did when we were sewing around the neckline. I just place them to kind of hold it here at the bottom, perfectly in place. There we go. Now we can come to our iron over here. And first we want to press everything under about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. Kind of just depends on your preference, what's easiest for you to do. Okay. And let's trim off this little excess here that we sewed. That will make it easier to do this seam over here. Okay, now that we've done it under 1/4 inch, now we're going to go over another inch and 1.5 inches. It kind of depends on the style you like. If you like a really chunky hem, go up more. The best is to try this on your child first and to see where it hits them so you don't make it too short. But sometimes you're making this as a gift or for someone and you're not always totally sure. So press that in place. And you can see that sewing those sides in is helping this as we fold it over. It kind of makes more of an A-line now going up. Okay, let's try the other side. Okay, you can pin this in place or you can just go straight to your machine and sew it. But let's go sew the hem in place, and we are almost done. We have to sew a button too. If you have any areas like this that you do have some excess fabric, just kind of tuck that and fold it in. It will be on the inside of the hem and you won't see it. From the outside. Okay, I'm gonna go press this hem one more time just so everything is nice and flat. I'm gonna sew my button on and then we'll see how it looks. Okay guys, check it out. You just sewed a dress. That is very impressive. For more ideas and tutorials, you can check out my website, madeeveryday.com. And for all of your sewing machine needs, head to babylock.com where it's all for the love of sewing. I'll see you next time. Bye.